No, I think you're right, and that's one of the reasons why you want to solve the mysteries for lots of different reasons, but solving them is an end in a lot of ways. I mean, we keep talking about different movies and books and everything else. I mean, I'm sure you've seen Memento, and one of, not to give away the ending of a 25-year-old movie if you haven't seen it, but one of the things is at some point the whole point of the movie, he's trying to find the person who killed his family, and you realize at some point that he found them and he avenged his family, but he makes a decision that he's going to destroy the evidence of that because he knows that what gives him purpose in life is to search, is to look. And he knows that once he's found it, then it's over. And the sort of striving for something, I think, is what gives us purpose. And you're absolutely right. While we're looking for it together, we're all searching. But once we find it, what's going to happen?
That's Brett Talley, an author of several best-selling novels and anthologies, including He Who Walks in the Shadows, That Which Shall Not Be, and The Fiddle is the Devil's Instrument. Brett is also the host of the highly rated true crime podcast, the Prosecutors Podcast. This is the Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair. This is the second part of a conversation with Brett on why we as people are fascinated by mysteries. Brett has been twice nominated for the Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement, the top award for horror writing presented annually by the Horror Writers Association. The works of writers who are nominated for the Bram Stoker Award, which is named after the Irish Victorian-era Gothic fiction writer who is the author of Dracula, are done by juries who are members of the Horror Writers Association. That Which Should Not Be was Brett's first novel and was published in 2011. In addition to being nominated for the Bram Stoker Award for a writer's first novel, it was a semi-finalist for the Goodreads Choice Awards and winner of the Journal Stone Horror Writing Contest. That Which Shall Not Be takes readers on a journey to Miskatonic University, a fictional school with a whispered reputation for being connected to the occult and supernatural, where a professor and a student search a nearby village for a book that's believed to control all the non-human forces that rule the earth. The pair bring the book back to Miskatonic University, opening up a gate to the netherworld. Brett was also nominated for a 2014 anthology, Limbus Inc. Book 2, that he edited, where 5 masters of horror, fantasy, and science fiction writing take readers to a world of time travel, human sacrifice, intergalactic beings, and much, much more. Brett is an attorney and also the author of several true ghost stories and a nonfiction book called Haunted Tuscaloosa, which explores the paranormal in an Alabama town, from the now shuttered local insane asylum and antebellum mansions said to be haunted by ghosts, to cemeteries where Confederate soldiers are said to still march, and ghost stories from the University of Alabama grounds. On the Prosecutors Podcast, Brett and his co-host Alice LaCour explore some of the mysteries of true crime, including the strange disappearances of people like the Jack family in British Columbia, the disappearance of Brianna Maitland, the daughter of our former guest Bruce Maitland, and Maura Murray, the little sister of our former guest Julie Murray. Part of their exploration of mysteries includes cases like those of the murders of John Benet Ramsey and Lacey Peterson, as well as whether Michael Peterson killed his wife, or whether, among other possibilities, it was an owl. Often, Brett and Alice help bring clarity to things that seem mysterious, like their exploration of the murder of Ruthie Mae McCoy, which inspired the 1992 movie Candyman, and the story of the real story that inspired the fears of razor blades and poison being in Halloween candy in the episode entitled The Man Who Killed Halloween, Sweet Dreams. Brett and Alice go beyond what might traditionally be considered true crime and have explored unexplained mysteries like Dyatlov Pass, where 9 Soviet hikers died under mysterious circumstances in the Ural Mountains, and the Khmer Dabain incident, where 6 other Soviet hikers disappeared in the mountains near Lake Baikal in southern Siberia. They also explored topics like the humanoid creatures reportedly seen in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, called the Mothman, whether the moon is hollow, and whether the Soviets lost cosmonauts in outer space. The Prosecutors Podcast was the 2023 winner of the People's Choice Creator of the Year Award at CrimeCon. This October, they've already tackled the exorcism of Annalise Michel, the unbelievably bizarre Corpsewood murders in northern Georgia, an episode on creepy places, and the case of Zona Hester, also known as the Greenbrier Ghost, the only case that Brett knows of where ghosts appear to have solved their own murder. What brings a lot of Brett's many interests together is his love of mysteries. Today, for this October episode, we're going to talk about some fascinating mysteries and why we as people are so gripped by them. Well, who was it? It was actually the woman who interviewed BTK. I can't think of Dennis Rader, who was the bind, torture, kill serial killer in Wichita. Catherine Ramsland. She talked about what true crime really is all about, and I'm gonna butcher her actual words, but she said it's just puzzles, and we like to solve puzzles. People enjoy puzzles. And I wonder whether like some element of for people like you and me, the ghost stories and things like that are more of the sort of like funnier, more relaxing puzzles, where the real life ones are a lot more scary for us. But the idea that what's in common, whether it's a solved case or not a solved case, it always starts off as a puzzle. That you're going with your readers or your listeners or your friends on some journey to solve the puzzle. And I wonder whether it's really what we enjoy together or what we bond over is that journey together. Because
you see that
yeah,
in some of like the sleuthing communities, people really do bond together, trying to figure things out, trying to solve things. And I think people typically have really good motives for this stuff. I mean, people, sometimes it goes overboard, and we've all seen that, and we've seen the damage that can happen from that. But I really think people go into it with this sort of, if we all put our heads together, maybe we can figure this thing out. And I think that is a good thing. And we talked about how crowdsourcing could be so important. You see that if you go to something like CrimeCon. I think people who've never gone to CrimeCon, and some people who really kind of turn their nose up to CrimeCon, don't realize how many people are there who are actually the victims of crime, looking to get their loved ones more attention, because they recognize that is one way to get those cases solved.
Yep, that it's actually, and that was one of the things I was saying about CrimeCon, both in 2023 and 2024. I was having a recent conversation with somebody about this, where I was saying, like, if I could be with the people who are the listeners there every day, like the people sitting in front of the giant board or wall of people who are missing, who are like talking about the area or saying that they know somebody who lived in that area, and like thinking about ways that they could help those cases, I would hang out with those people every day if I could. If every day could be CrimeCon, I would make it CrimeCon. But it's because of that. It's actually because, as much as I like spending time with the creators, it's amazing to spend time with the people who care about those cases and do want to solve them. And I do think their intentions are very good. I was thinking about this one case that I love is the wrong word, probably the wrong word for it, but I'm really fascinated by this case. This is another one that I went out to visit. I went out to Idaho, I think, in 2003 for this case. It's called the Lewis Clark Valley Murders, or some people call it the Snake River Murders. But basically, the mystery there, you guys should do this case at some point. The big part of the mystery there is that at one point, There in, I think it was like September of 1982, there are 3 people disappear from the Lewiston, Idaho Civic Theater. It's like 21-year-old girl, 18-year-old girl, and a 35-year-old man who was working there as the janitor. They just absolutely vanish. No one's found until a year later, about 45 miles away in I think east of there in Idaho. 2 of the girls' bodies were. They eventually have sort of like identified a prime suspect in it. And he was also linked to a disappearance a couple years later of another girl, and there might be another murder that's associated with it. And then another one back in Chicago when he was like a 15-year-old. So there's all this around this. And I'm fascinated by the case. I would investigate the case if I had the time. I contribute to helping the people who are looking into the case. But I do wonder sometimes, Brett, if that case is solved, like, would it take a certain amount of air out of it for me? Because I so enjoy solving puzzles. And it makes me wonder about myself, because there's a part of me that like cares very deeply about the victims, their families, other people like that. But I think there's a huge part of me that's drawn to the mental and intellectual exercise of solving puzzles. One, because I find it enjoyable, but also I think solving puzzles is one way I just make sense of the world, right? Like I make sense for me of people's behaviors or patterns, or I learn through solving puzzles. And I know that it's just interesting to me. I wonder if some of these big mysteries that I'm interested right now, even though I want them to be solved, whether I'll lose something if they are, if that makes sense.
No, I think it makes perfect sense. And I think you can see that, you can look at that in a couple different ways. I think in a lot of things we do as people, the sort of cliche, it's all about the journey, not the destination thing. I think a lot of people really enjoy putting puzzles together, and then when they finish them, it's not like that's the satisfying part. It was the
I don't have a Picasso now.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, the last few pieces are the most boring pieces, right? Like once you basically figure it out, it's like, okay, I got it now. Video games, right? I mean, the most fun with a video game is the hard part. Once like your character is overpowered, then you're bored with it, right? I feel like it's kind of like that. And I think one of the things about that ties into what we've been talking about is how unsatisfying solved mysteries are for a lot of different reasons. Because even if initially there's a jolt of energy when a case is solved. I mean, think about Lisk. That case I think has been solved. I think I can say that without prejudicing the current suspect in that case.
Safe
that
bet.
Case, yeah, it's a bad guy. That case, I mean, a fascinating mystery. A lot of a great book on that case.
Oh yeah, Lost Girls.
Lost Girls, fantastic.
Girl, yeah.
Love the focus on the actual victims more so than the killer.
Yep.
Now Rex Howard.
Can I recommend not reading it for the first time though when your partner is driving to Long Island for a weekend?
That's probably true. Rex Howerman lives up to our image of sort of the monster, right? I mean, he actually does.
Oh yeah.
But the thing is, I mean, let's say he's convicted, he's sentenced to life in prison, he goes away. How satisfied are you with that? Does that feel like justice? He murdered multiple people. Those girls are still dead. They'll always be dead. There's nothing that will bring them back. Even if you executed him, still, I mean, okay, he's dead. But and I feel like people run into that a lot and are kind of surprised by it, at how sort of unfulfilling it is. And I think you see that a lot with victims. And I think victims will tell you this. You go to trial and a lot of victims will say, I thought, when he was found guilty or when he was sent away.
Imagine selling your home and getting paid twice. Sound good? But how's that even possible? To sell your home and get paid twice? You can do it with Orchard. It's simple. Orchard makes you a solid cash offer on your home. If you agree, boom, here's your cash for your next home. Orchard handles everything from there, including paint, repair, list, and show your home. And if your old home sells for more than Orchard offered you, you get the upside cash. That bears repeating. When your old home sells for more than Orchard offered you, you get that money too. You get paid twice. And that happens 97% of the time with Orchard. Look, with so many home buying companies trying to lowball you, Orchard pays you the upside when your old home sells for more. Want to get paid twice when you sell your home? I know I would. Learn how to get paid twice and get a free valuation at Orchard.com. That's Orchard.com. Orchard.com.
You're a pro at managing your diabetes, but did you know United Healthcare has plans designed especially for you? United Healthcare Complete Care Plans are made specifically for people with certain chronic conditions like diabetes. See if you qualify, because if you do, you'll be able to access United Healthcare's large provider network for the extra care you may need. If you live in Georgia, you have options. Let their team guide you through those options so you can find the United Healthcare Medicare plan that's right for you. Just go to uhc.com/Medicare.
When he was executed, I would have closure. I would be able to move on. And actually, I just felt empty. And I think in so many, just the way we're built, I just think it's how we're built, that the mystery itself is much more invigorating than the solution. Not just because the solutions tend to be disappointing, but also just because, okay, now what, right?
Yeah. And I wonder whether it's like the way that we're wired as humans, as beings that are focused on learning and growing and solving. Like that's what, so much of our fulfillment is built in growth and new things. That's kind of an interesting thing. And maybe what it really is about is it's about the journey. I was curious about one thing that I found interesting about the podcast, and still find interesting about the podcast. You did Dyatlov Pass. You did how do you say it? Is the Khyber Dabain case? You did one on whether the moon is hollow. The Lost Cosmonauts, by the way, which I had never heard of. Lost Cosmonauts in space. I'm definitely hoping there's some truth to that, because it sounds so fascinating, because it raises so many questions. If you went floating off into space while alive and ended up outside of the orbit, just raises so many questions and so many mysteries for me. But the Mothman one in West Virginia, the Mothman creature, not the typical stuff I would say that most true crime podcasts would do. How did you guys decide to settle on that? I think it reminds me of something we were talking about before. It's like you and Alice sometimes are just like friends sitting on the couches in the living room, having conversations about interesting, cool stuff you love.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I am very glad that the podcast has been so successful. We're very blessed that it's been successful, but it's never been about being successful. It's about this podcast for me was enjoyable, really enjoyable, in some ways more enjoyable when 20 people were listening to it, right? And we were talking about this stuff. I like digging into this stuff. I like you said, trying to solve mysteries. I like talking about it with Alice and hearing other people's perspective. And for me, because that stuff is something I'm passionate about and something I always cared about, it was always going to be part of the podcast. We were always going to include those types of mysteries. They're pretty rare. We do those once every 4 or 5 months. A lot of times we'll do them after a big case. If we spend 14 weeks on a case, we did Adnan Syed, the most true crime of true crime cases. We did 14 episodes on it. And the next episode was, Is the Moon Hollow? Right. And I think we all needed that. We all needed the Is the Moon Hollow episode after that. And so number one, I love them. But number two, I think they're a little bit of a palate cleanser. And you can still do the same exercise of how you think about this stuff and how you apply the evidence to what you're looking at, because you can use that sort of analysis across your life, not just in true crime. Figuring out things is what we do. It's like you said, that is what drives us. And I think that's one reason we'll always do those. They never get as many listeners as the true crime stuff, because a lot of people are in it for the true crime and they don't care about that kind of stuff. But that doesn't matter to me because I'm passionate about them, and there are a lot of people who enjoy them.
Yeah, and there's something like, and I just remember what was Dial-Up Pass was like 5 parts. I don't even know how to, I don't even know how to capture this or describe it to you because I listened to it before I knew you, so I've probably never said this. There was something just magical about it. I mean, you guys told the story well. I felt like as I was listening, I knew the characters, but there was just something magical, and I don't even mean about the story. Well, I mean, maybe it is about the story, but there was just something like truly magical about the experience of going on that 5-part journey to the point where when I have a long road trip, I took one to North Carolina, loaded up, downloaded Dial-Up Pass. When my aunt had her funeral in October of last year, and it's like 3 hours down, 3 hours back, I loaded up Dial-Up Pass, listened to the first part on the way down, the first part on the way back. I had a plane trip over, where was I going? I may have been going to Seattle or someplace. It was somewhere on the West Coast. And I loaded the Dial-Up Pass for the plane. And it was like reading a great book, as much as it was listening to a true crime podcast. But as you say it, like when I think of Dial-Up Pass and I think about the story of Adnan Syed or the work you guys did on John Bonet, it's the same sort of structure in a way. The same sort of like looking at the evidence from all the different angles. And one of the things you guys do too, that I really like in all the episodes is you tell it from a timeline perspective. You don't really hide, like a lot of writers do, hide clues that happen up front and bring it all together in the back. But there's just something magical about the experience of listening to that. And I cannot 100% put a finger on it, but I find myself going back and back to those kinds of cases that you guys have done. And, particularly something about, I think part of it for me is something about it not having a resolution or there being competing resolutions. It lets my mind keep on running into new ideas and new places, and I can research new things. I think I've read 4 books maybe and bought 5 books on Dial-Up Pass. So I don't know. There's something powerful about it for me, at least.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about that case. I feel like Dial-Up Pass is the dragon I'll be chasing for the rest of my life. It is the ultimate mystery to me. It's the one that has always grabbed me the most. It has this just tremendous cast of characters, these really interesting people who also happen to be fascinating from the perspective of they're these Soviet kids in the late 1950s. Not like, so different from us. And yet when you learn about them, you read their diaries, they're just like us. You know what I mean? There's that case is just, it's incredible. And they're these sort of joyous kids out for this hike, except for the one who's the grizzled World War II veteran who survived Stalingrad, who's sort of an unusual addition to the group. But nevertheless, they're out there doing this thing that is hard and challenging, but should not be deadly. And then they disappear, but they are found. But the way they're found makes the mystery even greater, and all the competing evidence and the secrecy of the Soviet Union and a lot of the strangeness of the things that were going on. It is just, to me, the perfect mystery. And I think it worked well for us because I, like you, have read just about everything you can possibly read on that case. I mean, ever since I read that crack.com article, I was all the way down the rabbit hole on Dial-Up Pass. I read Donnie Eichert's book, which is fantastic. Don't agree with him in his conclusion, but fantastic book. And then there's so many great books. Some of them written by Russians and translated in English that are really good,
and it gets solved. Like somebody writes a giant article about how it's been solved every year, and it's so funny. Every time I pick one up, I'm like, yeah, no. I'm like, nice try. Good luck.
It's like the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is unmasked every year, and it's always a different person.
Yes, right. Well, I think of the other one too. It was the Kaimar Debane incident, which was like, is that the Lake Baikal one?
Yes.
The giant lake in Russia and Siberia, and I guess that's like southeast Siberia. Yeah, southeast Siberia, and I forget how many hikers were there, but they're hiking up the mountain, and the first person, and I think it was the youngest person in the group or the second youngest person in the group, collapses, and then eventually they all start collapsing, and one woman sort of like makes it away. And I remember listening to you guys do your episodes on it and thinking to myself, oh, I'm listening to an audiobook of the girl who loved Tom Gordon right now. As she goes down the mountain, on her travel, is never going to get out of the forest. And I think it had that same kind of mystery appeal to some of the stories that Stephen King writes, because it speaks to, like our fears, and there's altruism in there because the older hiker in that group essentially runs back to help and ends up dying and warning people to get away. There's the loneliness of the trip of the survivor. There's the madness she eventually gets to. Because isn't that the one where she finally finds her way to water near the lake and has just kind of like lost it and walks out to wash her hair? That's how you get to
wash your hair.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And these kayakers are like, what's going on? No, that case, you're right. And it's interesting you mentioned Stephen King, because I think one of the things that makes Stephen King great, or at least my favorite Stephen King books are the books that are firmly grounded in reality with just a little bit of a twist. So they're pretty much absolute reality. Then it's not a magical world. It's not, anything wild and crazy. It's our world with just something's a little off. And the little offness it's almost like the uncanny valley, right? Like it's so close to where we live that it's even creepier, that it's just a little bit different. And a lot of these cases that are the best, that's a good example, because they're just hiking up a mountain. Normal day, nothing extraordinary about it. And then all of a sudden they started bleeding out of their eyes and their ears and collapsing and dying. And you have this one girl who, whatever is happening, is utterly unaffected by it. Everybody else is dying one after another. And she's just standing there watching it happen. And then she flees and survives and lives to tell the tale and this insane story. And there's something about that is just, to me, so deeply unsettling, because it's so normal, except for this one insane thing that happens in the middle of the story.
This one little twist that throws it. It's interesting too that you make that point about Stephen King, because I was thinking about him recently because I was looking at a bunch of my books. I've been reorganizing some of my books on the shelf. And I was thinking, is he really actually a horror writer? Or is he a writer who's like really good at sliding some horror in? Like, obviously, Christine, The Shining, Cujo, like horror stories. But a lot of my favorite work, I mentioned The Stand, The Firestarter, Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, even to some extent Pet Sematary, even though it's got a supernatural part. I sort of feel like he's a really good writer of stories that have these subtle lessons in them. Like for me, Christine, or was it Carrie? Carrie was really about bullying, right? And then, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon was about loneliness. The Stand was about the risks of totalitarianism and all these other things, right? Hidden in there. And it's got a supernatural twist in each of them, but it's really like, I feel like sometimes the stories that we tell in general, particularly thrillers, are really sort of like warnings, like more palatable warnings. And I feel like sometimes when we're dealing with like mysteries or we're dealing with, I don't know, any kind of unexplained thing, it's a more palatable way to learn some life lessons, if that makes sense, or an easier or more enthralling way. I probably learned more from those two series about 1950s and 1960s Soviet Union than the many books I've read on Soviet Union.
No, I'm absolutely convinced of that the best way to teach lessons is through fiction or, horror. Horror is unique. It's not unique, but it's powerful in the way that it's often a metaphor for something going on. Zombies, metaphors for all sorts of things. Think back to like Not a Living Dead and how it's a metaphor for sort of racism and then consumerism and then, various other things, the invasion of the body snatchers and the Red Scare and just all these, all these different ways you can talk about real issues that are going on through the lens of a horror movie and not even realize maybe that you're learning a lesson while you're reading it. I think you see that a lot, like you said, in Stephen King's books. When my co-author and I wrote a couple books about ghosts, in a lot of ways, those were history books. They were books about the history of the area that we were talking about. People wouldn't read that. They wouldn't read or not many people would read a history of Tuscaloosa.
Right.
But if it's a ghost history of Tuscaloosa, then all of a sudden they want to read it. I mean, a lot of the chapters in that book barely had any ghosts in them, but people would read it because that's what draws them in, and then they end up learning a lot in the process.
Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts for the power, performance, and reliability of a new Super Start battery. Visit O'ReillyAuto.com.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Zaxby's Sensation Salad is so much more than a plain old salad. It's a salad, which begs the question, at what point does a salad stop being a salad and become a salad? Is it when you add Zaxby's fried chicken to it? Crunchy wontons? Asian slaw? Citrus vinaigrette? Teriyaki glaze? Sweet and spicy sauce? Or is it when you top it all with a handmade perfectly fried egg roll? Without a doubt, the egg roll. The Sensation Salad, only at Zaxby's.
Oh, that's really interesting you say that, because you gave me, I think in 2023, you gave me a signed copy that I can see right now of Haunted Tuscaloosa. And, you guys wrote about the insane asylum there and, the haunted insane asylum. You wrote about the natives who once lived on that land and sort of like whether they're sort of still haunting around and all sorts of tales of spirits and interesting things about Tuscaloosa. But one thing that I didn't think about until what you said right now, I probably learned more about Tuscaloosa as a city and its history through the vehicle of that book than much of what I've read about Alabama and different parts of the South at different points. Because I think a lot of the history I read tends to concentrate on certain errors. But the other thing too is you learn other lessons in that, right? You learn lessons about sort of like the way that we treat mentally ill people, or about the impact on natives that our society or some things that we view as positive, the negative impact on them. That these stories are learning vehicles where I think something like Haunted Tuscaloosa would have been a lot easier to read than if you had said, hey, Jason, I want you to read the story about like what horrible things happened to the natives in Tuscaloosa. I'd been like, okay. But reading it that way, I'm like, all right. Same thing with the mentally ill part. Like, if you had said, hey, Jason, I want you to read this book on how we handled asylums in the past, it would have been a lot harder than reading it through the lens of the ghosts who haunt us. Yeah,
I think storytelling is the way that we've taught lessons going back as far as you can go. I mean, you think about how boring some people find history to be, but if you were like a young Greek listening to someone recite the Odyssey and the Iliad, and you're learning all this stuff that happened. I mean, that was an incredibly effective way to teach the history of your people. And I think you see that in so many things. And I think sometimes I feel like we kind of have gotten away from that in a negative way, where we teach a lot of stuff in a very dry sort of, I mean, take even movies like Oppenheimer about the creation of the nuclear bomb. I mean, that's a fascinating thing, the creation of the nuclear bomb. But how many people are really going to sit down and read, as we start off, an encyclopedia article about that? But they might watch a really entertaining movie that also teaches them a lot of things. And I know the whole thing wasn't historical and their errors or whatever, but there always are going to be those, even in encyclopedia articles. But it's a great way to learn. And I think you are more likely to learn things and retain them if you're being entertained.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And my takeaway from Oppenheimer, there are lots of fascinating things about it. I've read a lot about, Manhattan Project and the development of the bomb. I had no idea about the downwinders, the people who were affected by the downwind. And so that became like a fascinating new avenue. And trust me, I did go down the Wikipedia rabbit hole on that one as well. So I think that's a great example. One of the things you've known me long enough, you may have picked up on this. So when I have stressful moments in my life or things go wrong, my friends always say that like, it's not about like resolution for me, but it's like once things make sense to me, like you could come in here and you could shoot me in the arm with a gun. Once I understand like why, like it makes sense to me, I'm like, oh, okay. It's both a great strength and a fatal flaw. And so like, an important thing for me and my comfort in the world is to make sense of things. And like they even joke about it at work. They're like, you are so forgiving of people. They could do the craziest thing as long as you're like, oh, now I understand why they did it. Like, you can't stop at you solving the puzzle, Jason. But there's another part of me that says, like, as much as I want to make sense of the world, and I get like, I feel great stress when I can't make sense of what's happening, that if you were to take away art, if we didn't have the unexplained, it would be like not having the subjective, and we would lose a certain amount of beauty if we knew all the answers. I mean, like, that sounds, it sounds like on one hand, it sounds great, know all the answers. On another hand, it sounds like it would be so unfulfilling if I did have all the answers. And I wonder whether that's part of what, like, the attraction to mysteries is. Kind of like art, we would just lose something so deeply if we did know everything.
Yeah, it's, sometimes I think about how boring heaven would be, like, everything, there's nothing really to strive for. You're just sort of there, right? And I feel like
God holds back a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Challenges.
Or you think about that scene in The Matrix about when they talk about, I forget which one it is, but they talk about how they created multiple matrices, and like the first Matrix was a paradise, and people hated it. Yeah, they just rejected the programming. And I feel like it's kind of a similar thing. If there were no mysteries, if everything was very straightforward and boring, yeah, I think you're right. The magic would be lost. I mean, it would be, I don't know. It would, it's hard to imagine what that would be like, because mystery is such a part of our lives. But no, I think it would be horrible. I don't think I could stand it.
Yeah, no, it would be really tough. Have I ever, there are many things I consider doing in my life, but one of them, even though I'm not the world's best person at math, I consider cryptology, like the art of like breaking codes, code breaking and other stuff like that. I just love any and every puzzle I can potentially get. And I remember first time I ever visited CIA headquarters, they have this puzzle called Cryptos there, right? And it's like, is it the main? It's the new headquarters building it's in front of. And it was a puzzle that was built that people have been trying to solve forever. Like the people over at the National Security Agency try to solve it because they want to beat the CIA people to solve it. And you'll love this, Brett. So this is the first time I've ever been there. Two things that I didn't realize. One, leave your cell phone in the car. You're not supposed to take it in the building. So that was mistake number one. do not loiter for 30 minutes outside the sculpture either as a part of it. But I always thought it was kind of funny that like I go to visit this cool place like the CIA for the first time, and I'm like way more fascinated by this crazy sculpture sitting outside of it. And every now and then I'll read stories about how people have come close to solving it or they're about to break it. And like even though I think it's so cool, I kind of like I'm almost fearful that people will solve it. Like I'm fearful that people will find the lost city of Atlantis and explain it, and then I'll be like, oh no. It was Richard Allen in Delphi. It's gonna be way more boring than I wanted. And I think of things like going back into our literature and our fables, whether it's like the quest for the Holy Grail as an example. All these things are making me think that part of what you said before, it's bringing me back to what you said before, that part of this is really, part of mysteries are really an opportunity for us to go on a journey, but not just that. Like you talked about the web sleuthing communities, but it's to go on a journey together, a shared journey with other people where we can like learn and we can talk about. And I think about the podcast the same way. It sparks conversations that thinking about the people in your community, I don't think we would normally have with each other if these stories and these mysteries weren't there that, open doors for us to talk about all sorts of things we would have never done.
No, I think you're right. And that's one of the reasons why you want to solve the mysteries for lots of different reasons, but solving them is an end in a lot of ways. I mean, we keep talking about different movies and books and everything else. I mean, I'm sure you've seen Memento.
Oh yeah.
And one of, not to give away the ending of a 25-year-old movie if you haven't seen it, but one of the things is at some point the whole point of the movie, he's trying to find the person who killed his family. And you realize at some point that he found them and he avenged his family. But he makes a decision that he's going to destroy the evidence of that because he knows that what gives him purpose in life is to search, is to look.
Yeah.
And he knows that once he's found it, then it's over. And the sort of striving for something, I think, is what gives us purpose. And you're absolutely right. While we're looking for it together, we're all together, we're all searching. But once we find it, what's going to happen? Well, then we're all going to go our separate ways, right? Like we'll shake hands, tell each other, good job, found the treasure.
Yeah.
We'll go our separate ways. And there's something about that's, it's like at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, they all ride off together, right? But the adventure's over.
They're going their separate ways.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think the search is the joy. The finding will always be disappointing.
Yeah. Well, I think like it reminds me of U2 in their album Joshua Tree. They have I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. And that's one of the songs, and the line is I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And they talk about like climbing the highest mountains and doing all these different things that like maybe part of the point isn't to really find, it's to do those things like climb those mountains and go out on those seas and travel that journey together. I often talk about like things like suffering are things that unite us, right? We have this shared, everyone goes through suffering, but everyone also has questions and everyone also has things that they're trying to understand. And it's nice to be on the boat with people who are taking that same journey.
No, I think so. I think in so many ways, that's what ties us together. And in this time in particular, and we've talked about this before, there are so few things that bind us, it seems like. And it seems like some things that have bound us have kind of fallen away. And I think grabbing onto those things that bring people together is probably more important now than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I even think about your community and I think about the diversity of views and races and life experiences and political views among the people, but we all still have this bond. And I'm so shocked you and I would get to the end of a conversation and it would all come back to community. I'm really shocked. Belonging. And there's something beautiful about it, I think. Anyway. Well, I was going to just want to thank you, Brett, again for coming in and give you a shot. If you want to offer any sort of like closing thoughts, or also, where are you guys? Are you guys headed in the same direction with a podcast in terms of continuing to pursue some of these mysteries?
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, my parting message would be never stop looking. And the great thing is, we've talked about how awful it would be if we ran out of mysteries. That's never going to happen. I remember when we started the podcast, I thought, man, we're going to do this for a while and then we'll run out of cases. And then I guess we'll just stop. And I look at our case list now, it's like 500 cases long and think we could do this for the rest of our lives. And we'll never run out. And that's a joy. And I hope people will stay on that journey with us.
Yeah. Well, I plan to. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. If you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including an awesome listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For ad-free and early episodes and deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, including bonuses like one with Brett on the Dyatlov Pass incident, you can join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair. This is the Silver Linings Handbook. We'll see you all again next week.
They don't call her Confiscation Kamala for nothing. Don't take it from us.
And I support a mandatory buyback program.
A mandatory buyback program? That means the government forcing you to turn in your firearms. To what lengths would Kamala go? Well, she doesn't even support the individual right to own a firearm.
I'm prepared to take executive action and put in place a ban on the importation of assault weapons into our country.
We get it. Sometimes it's tough to understand what she's talking about. But on the Second Amendment and your rights, Confiscation Kamala has been crystal clear. Her gun control agenda comes straight from that petri dish of bad ideas that is California. She can claim to be a gun owner all she wants, but we all know she's the same anti-gun California radical she's always been. Don't be left defenseless. Defeat Confiscation Kamala. Vote Trump like your life depends on it, because it does. NRA Political Victory Fund paid for and is responsible for the content of this advertising. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. NRAPVF.org.
You're a pro at managing your diabetes, but did you know United Healthcare has plans designed especially for you? United Healthcare Complete Care Plans are made specifically for people with certain chronic conditions like diabetes. See if you qualify, because if you do, you'll be able to access United Healthcare's large provider network for the extra care you may need. If you live in Georgia, you have options. Let their team guide you through those options so you can find the United Healthcare Medicare plan that's right for you. Just go to uhc.com/Medicare.